In his new book, Saving Nine, The Fight Against the Left's Audacious Plan to Pack the Supreme Court and Destroy American Liberty, Utah Senator Mike Lee argues that the left's partisan push to pack the Supreme Court with liberal justices has fully migrated from the fringes into the mainstream of Democratic politics.
Senator Lee says that President Joe Biden and other powerful Democrats are claiming the court is broken and actively dismantling our democracy. Senator Mike Lee joins us now to discuss. Senator, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So talk to us about your book. Obviously, packing the court is something that I think Democrats and liberals have talked about with increasing regularity in the last few years. What do you see? What are you afraid of with that effort?
We've lived our entire lives with the idea of court packing being regarded as a bad idea. Mm-hmm. I never thought I'd see it resurface and be taken seriously in my lifetime, but it's happened. So yeah, it concerns me. The minute you change that number, you change the composition of the court to achieve a more desired political outcome, you're going to make it a political body. Left or right, that should concern you. And that's why I wrote Saving Nine. I wrote Saving Nine to help people understand that when you threaten to pack the court, whether the plan succeeds or fails legislatively, it politicizes the court, and that could be dangerous. But if they actually succeeded, it would be disastrous, because what you would have then is a political football that would change every time the composition of Congress and the occupant of the White House changes, and it'd go back and forth each time with a one-way ratchet effect, expanding the court's size.
As the presidency has kind of discredited itself, the Congress does so little now. It's so partisan and political and tribal. My theory is that the court has almost had to take on more of an almost policy-making function because there's so little policy being made otherwise, and thus is now getting this all of this attention. I view, as a libertarian, I view the Supreme Court often, imperfectly certainly, but often as an important bulwark against intrusive and expansive government. So that would be my concern, I guess, with bringing expanding it beyond what it does now. It does fulfill that function to some degree. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so as to your point about stepping in to fill the policy void, that would be one thing if our Constitution contemplated or even allowed that. It doesn't. In fact, the Supreme Court's prohibited from doing that. It would be a violation of their judicial oaths. The court is there to do one thing, which is resolve disputes, cases and controversies brought before the court's jurisdiction to decide what the law means. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the power to step in and decide what should be, only the power to decide what the law says. And so if the court were to do that, it would be a betrayal of its oath. And so regardless of which end of the political spectrum you are from, that should worry you that we would have unelected, unaccountable judges serving lifetime appointments with the power to make policy in the absence of a constitutional mandate.
Well, what would you say to people that talk about the fact that the Supreme Court's, the number of justices has changed repeatedly throughout our history? 9 isn't a number set by the Constitution, and it's not the number it's always been.
That's right. That is a fair point. It is something that's set by statute. Mm-hmm. But we have left it there since 1869. So we're dealing with something that's over 150 years old, and we've reached this sort of leveling point where that's just been accepted as the number. It's impossible to change it at this point, given how politicized the court has made itself, without over-politicizing the court as an institution.
Okay, but we do have lots of precedents in place that the Supreme Court itself has the ability to, overrule, and we see some of those happening now. So what makes this, the number of Supreme Court justices, so untouchable as a precedent that we've relied on if laws themselves and rights themselves aren't?
The Constitution itself doesn't prohibit Congress from doing that. It's just that it would be unwise to do it, because then you would see a shift. Remember, when someone's appointed to the Supreme Court, once they're on the Supreme Court, they're in there. Their position can't just be eliminated while they're still in office. So this would end up having this one-way ratchet effect in which you'd see 4 new justices appointed by President Biden if his legislation suddenly got passed into law. Predictably, the next time Republicans got the majorities in the House and in the Senate and controlled the White House, you'd see another 4 added. Maybe it would be 6. This would go back and forth until before long, the court would start to resemble less of a judicial body and more of a political body A really big one at that, something like the Intergalactic Senate. Star Wars.
Right. Can you imagine that? I think that is the danger. If we ratchet it up, right? So Democrats pack the court, Republicans turn around and pack the court, and then you truly would just duplicate the legislative function of Congress, because you'd have a court eventually the size of Congress.
That's right, and that's why I talk a lot about this in chapters 7 and 8 of Saving Nine, about the fact that once the court takes on that role, it becomes untethered. And a lot of other protections that we all rely on could become both uncertain and subject to these changing political appetites. But unlike within the political branches, where you can simply unelect someone, you can't do that with a court. Right. And that's why it's so troubling that they would want to do this.
Right.
But what's the actual likelihood of that, right? We have changed the number of people on the court before. We have seen court packing, and we haven't seen this back and forth disco between Democrats and Republicans packing the court. So what's different now that says if we did it, that we're going to go in this back and forth game? What's the likelihood of that?
First of all, we've never seen this dramatic a lurch, where they want to add 4 justices in one fell swoop. The number, as I explained in the first 2 chapters of Saving Nine, has gone up and it's gone down, but it's almost always gone up and down in small increments, typically of 1 justice at a time. So adding 4 to it, 4 justices to the court, not because there is a workload issue or a personnel issue, lack of human resources, but simply to obtain more desirable political outcomes for the incumbent president. That's unprecedented.
So your issue isn't changing the amount of us adding people, it's the amount, it's the 4 seats.
Well, it's the amount and the subjective motivation for doing so. He's doing so openly, brazenly, in order to achieve a more palatable political outcome for him. And that's the wrong question. We should always be looking for judges and justices who are willing to interpret the law, not achieve a desired political outcome.
How do you feel about the Supreme Court confirmation process? It seems to have gotten so bitter, so vicious, and truly in both sides' faction, the way the appointees have been treated, and they don't answer questions really anyway. Frankly, right? If it's an important issue, they say, "Well, I'm not going to give away how I might rule on this," and the process doesn't seem like it's the Senate's role in particular doesn't actually seem like it's serving the function it's supposed to serve, because they just become these very, very bizarre and frustrating show trials. We saw that with Kavanaugh. I think we saw that with Justice Brown to some degree. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, the hearings have become something of a spectacle. We saw that a lot with Justice Kavanaugh. We saw it some with Barrett. We've seen it going all the way back to Robert Bork. That was in modern history. That was the first sort of 3-ring circus Senate confirmation hearing for a Supreme Court justice. It is unfortunate. It's also the natural, foreseeable, and almost unavoidable consequence of the court taking on more of a policy function and more of a political function. But my view, as I explained in Saving Nine, is that we should move away from that by making the court less political, not more. Packing the Supreme Court would make it more political. Mm-hmm.
And before we let you go, I just want to get your take on, I understand you're sponsoring legislation to deal with the baby formula shortage issue, the FDA regulation issue. This is something we've talked about a lot on the show. I've been so frustrated that regulators seem to have gotten in the way of having greater access to formula. Can you talk about what your legislation does?
This baby formula shortage is entirely of government creation. If you're a libertarian, as you've described yourself, this will sort of build your belief in the libertarian cause. The government has created this through a series of import restrictions that are basically protectionist in their purpose, regulatory restrictions dealing with hyper-aggressive labeling mandates, and an outgrowth of the WIC program, the fact that WIC voucher recipients very often are required to go after only a single brand. If that single brand, that specific product within that brand isn't available, the voucher is useless. My legislation would lift all 3 of those problems for the next 6 months to allow us to catch up.
Fantastic. Well, Senator, thank you so much for joining us. The book again is Saving Nine, and there it is on screen, and we're so grateful for you talking about it with us.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back with more Rising right after this.